all the people I've murdered by letting you live.
I never kept count.
I did.
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
Hey, what's going on, guys? So every couple of weeks, I feel like I see people arguing over the same topic. Should superheroes kill? And at face value, the answer is no. The whole point of superheroes is that they are the noblest of noble. They are paragons of virtue, and they carry themselves proudly with a childlike sense of wonder. So no, superheroes do not kill. But, and it's a big but, we're talking S-tier thickums here. The question of whether or not superheroes should be killers doesn't really come from a resentment of the traditional superhero archetype, but much rather a reaction to the way in which writers and artists have started depicting supervillains. That is the real problem here. Okay, so in order to make this point, I'm going to have to go backwards to go forward. So, going back to the 1930s and 40s for a second, back when superheroes were first invented, they weren't really superheroes in the way that we traditionally view superheroes. They were just another extension of pulp heroes, like the Spider, Doc Savage, Buck Rogers, John Carter, the Shadow. These were all characters who, in their pursuit of justice and adventure, wouldn't mind dropping a couple bodies like some bad Taco Bell. And characters like Superman and Batman and Marvel's Invaders and most, if not all, of the other Golden Age superheroes were cut from the same cloth. But then the 1950s roll around, and now we're in post-war Americana, and with it comes along this new sense of cultural puritanism. That's when a lot of American entertainment for both kids and adults were cleaned up. The edges are all sanded away, and everything's pure and squeaky clean, and that meant American superheroes too, along with any popular surviving supervillains that were grandfathered in from the golden age of comics of the 1930s and 40s into the silver age of comics of the 1950s and 60s. This means that superhero stories went from being gritty, pulpy, crime thrillers, or politically topical reactionary power fantasies to goofy, silly, family-friendly, family-oriented, whodunit, prankster-type stories. This also means that supervillains went from being serial killers and war profiteers to being glorified pranksters, pulling off light-hearted, gimmicky bank heists and trying to publicly humiliate superheroes with wacky hijinks. But it was all fun and games. Nothing too serious, nothing too scary, nothing too real. And as a result, superheroes could not kill their enemies. Killing became a taboo, which, in all fairness, most of the guys writing and drawing these comics were World War II vets. I can imagine the hesitation of a lot of these guys not wanting to write about killing your enemies after just coming home from one of the most violent eras in world history. Like, come on, I get it. And things stayed that way for quite a while. It was a successful formula, and it laid the groundwork for Saturday morning cartoons throughout the late 60s and the 70s and the 80s and stuff like that, and it just worked. So I forgot to mention this when I recorded this video the first time, and I don't know how, but the Comics Code of Authority, which was formed in 1954, played a major role in the censorship of American comic books. But it wasn't a government organization. Instead, it was a voluntary committee established by magazine publishers themselves to overlook and ensure that there was nothing too gay or communist or taboo being printed in comics. It was an alternative to government oversight, and it was strictly enforced throughout the 50s and 60s, but as time went on, they got way more relaxed with what was allowed, before ultimately it just sort of went away. If you're interested in the Comics Code Authority, I highly recommend reading Comic Book Nation, The Transformation of Youth Culture in America. It's by Bradford W. Wright, I believe. It's a really insightful book and can give you a better picture behind the history of the CCA than I can, mainly because this video is not really about the CCA, but I digress. Anyways, back to the video. But then you get into like the mid-80s and 90s, and this is when things change. Kinda. 1980s America is a very different animal compared to 1950s America. Culturally and politically, people are a lot more jaded, people are more cynical, and all for completely valid reasons. Between the Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, every other major political figure or activist being assassinated, the entertainment sensibilities of the American people just changed. People wanted something more tangible. They wanted something more gritty. They wanted something more real. And that's when the comic book writers and artists of the day sort of kind of matched those sensibilities in taking a lot of the supervillains back to their golden age roots in being serial killers and corrupt politicians and mercenaries and war profiteers and stuff like that. But the superheroes themselves largely remained untouched. They were still being written with a lot of those Silver Age sensibilities, for the most part. Some of them slipped through the cracks, but those were outliers. And as time went on, it's kind of interesting seeing how the supervillains would wind up becoming more monstrous, more depraved, more psychotic, but the heroes remained their ever-optimistic Silver Agey selves, which sort of brings to light the absurdity of the dynamic between superheroes and supervillains in the modern day, and begs the question, why don't superheroes just kill their supervillains? Which, at this point, is honestly a valid question, because in the Silver Age, and a bit of the Bronze Age, which is like the 70s and early 80s, but really the Silver Age, there was both an internal and external logic behind, for example, Batman not killing the Joker. Because in the Silver Age of comics, the worst thing the Joker was doing was robbing banks dressed up like Charlie Chaplin, or throwing bubblegum grenades at people so they're all covered in bubblegum. His crimes weren't really all that serious, so killing the Joker would have just been unnecessarily violent and cruel. But then you have modern day Joker, who's basically like, yeah, Batman, I just raped 37 toddlers to death while listening to Psy's Gangnam Style. Every thrust was perfectly matched to the beat. I'm sorry, but at that point, there is no point in trying to play this 8-dimensional chess game and trying to find some sort of moral high ground. Just any action that Batman takes that doesn't involve twisting the Joker's head 720 degrees around his shoulders is, at the very least, painfully and disgustingly negligent, and it just makes Batman look like a fucking idiot. And that goes for all superheroes, really. Like, Lex Luthor stealing 40 cakes? Devious. Diabolical. But not worth killing anyone over. But Lex Luthor hiding a bomb in a disabled man's wheelchair and blowing up the Capitol building just to publicly humiliate Superman? That's a little extreme. And I know that's an example from a movie and not a comic book, but even still, that's perfectly in line with a lot of the stuff that post-crisis Lex Luthor would do and just get away with, because he has an army of lawyers who will keep him out of prison. And again, completely silly, this game of 8-dimensional chess and playing the moral high ground, because how many times is Superman gonna have to fly up to Lex Luthor's balcony and give him the frowny face like, I know what you did, and Lex Luthor do the little smug smile and play coy like, oh, whatever do you mean, Superman? Can I help you with anything with my billions upon trillions of dollars, or my army of lawyers who will prove that I did nothing wrong? Again, fuck this guy, grab his handsome Squidward looking ass by the temples and just throw him into the sun. vanquish his evil ass. And that's the real problem with the whole superheroes not killing supervillains thing. We've gotten to a point now where the supervillains are just too grotesquely evil. Meanwhile, the heroes are stuck with their Silver Age sensibilities, and they're just... the dynamic is off. Glaringly and parodically so. Which leads people who are willing to spend more than 5 seconds thinking about these things to the logic of, wouldn't the heroes save more lives if they just killed the bad guys? The villains were changed, but the heroes weren't changed to match their savagery. And that's the real problem with the whole no-kill rule with superheroes. I think, at least. And I'm less interested in answering the question of, why doesn't Batman just kill the Joker, and more interested in asking why DC insists on Batman having a 1950s code of honor, while the Joker isn't written like 1950s comic book Joker. That's the real question. But those are my thoughts. What about you? Let me know down below in the comment section. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care, guys.
We'll be right back.